Hi, everybody. Today, I'm continuing my reading from Transforming Suffering into Wisdom, a book of meditation practices, mindfulness practices I wrote a number of years ago. The section that we're in right now is the section involving what I call the third intention, being fearless and forgiving in the midst of suffering. And we've begun to look at what the structure of suffering looks like, and we're considering kind of what is suffering from a larger standpoint. What are some of the facts or factors as we begin to figure out how can we take this entity that we call suffering and transform it into wisdom, particularly now in this time of crisis in the world. How do we learn to do that inside ourselves? How do we learn to do that within our society, in our civilization, in our communities, in our families, in our countries? So this chapter is a chapter that I think of as just a fact, and you'll find it interesting, I think, and surprising. Chapters are just a page. This one is called Suffering is Unbearable. All right. Suffering is unbearable. A moment of suffering is unbearable. That is to say, we leap to something else when we suffer. TV, refrigerator, telephone, email, alcohol, lovers, the mall, complaints, resentments and blames, projections and introjections. Rather than experience in a clear way what suffering actually is, what it feels like and how it's constructed, rather than experience it, we get lost in it. Suffering is unbearable regardless of its intensity. Once we have succumbed to its cloying structure of feelings, thoughts, and self, we blank out. We don't see things clearly. And we seek to escape. Granted, some suffering is more physically painful than others. Some suffering is more intense. But whether we suffer from high fever, starvation, torture, or the threat of death, or from someone spiking our tires, spilling a plate of food on our laps, or selling us a lemon instead of an orange, the structure of suffering is the same. And the path to its release inside ourselves is the same. So I think there are two kind of remarkable facts being emphasized here. First one for the first time in this book, and that is that suffering itself is unbearable. Just even a moment of suffering is unbearable. When we get caught in suffering, we immediately leap to other thoughts, leap to other things, try to do other things. This is where a lot of our bad habits come from. So the first thought is just recognizing that it is unbearable as it is, once we're caught in it, caught in the structure of suffering. So we're going to be looking as we go further with our chapters, how do we, instead of getting caught in that unbearability of suffering, how do we notice that that's where we are and begin to unravel it into its structure and do our practice with it? So it's not surprising that we get stuck in it. It is unbearable. It's extremely difficult to be with without kind of really opening to it and seeing it clearly. So that's the second fact that we're looking at here. And we've already begun to talk about it, and that is that every single time we suffer, the structure of it's exactly the same, which is the jumble of feelings, the thoughts that get hooked to it, and the self. So if we can realize that we're not enmeshed, if we can realize that we are enmeshed and kind of wake up to that and go, oh, what's the structure look like? Then we can go back to that practice that I talked about a few times ago, which is to let our thoughts go and let our feelings be. Taking suffering on when it is absolutely unbearable, it's quite an amazing thing. Thank you for joining me on this journey.